How's that? Is that okay?
Wonderful.
Okay, sorry about that. I've had a riding accident, so I've had some back surgery, so I'm not on my normal top of my game, I'm afraid. This is my first day back at work. Yes, I gave a talk to the Cambridge University Conservative Association a couple of years ago on why I'm not a Conservative, sort of loosely based on Hayek's lecture of 1960, which I thought would be a good thing to talk to the Conservative Association of Cambridge, tell them why I'm not one of them. And of course, by the time he finished, a lot of them weren't one of them either after that. So I thought what I'd do, I was very interested to hear Frank's presentation, Frank Godfrey's presentation, much of which I agree. I think most of us would have agreed with a lot of it. But I suppose, this new genre of populist, I'm now a populist politician, I suppose, which sounds pretty disgusting, but I suppose that's what I am. And so I'm coming at this perhaps from a slightly different angle. So I'm more about focusing on questions. I think before we can get to Frank's solutions, and he has some good ones, I think we need to focus on what the questions are. And if we do that, we can move libertarianism forward. Now, I was speaking at the Mises Institute in Alabama a couple of years ago, and I got a fairly rough time from the sort of anarcho-Rothbardians for being a bit wishy-washy about libertarianism. And I had to admit that I'm one of the few libertarians who are members of the Lord's Day Observance Society, and we have to work that one out intellectually if we can. But I think we need to see if we can persuade people to start considering libertarianism and the option of libertarianism. Because my job, I suppose, I'm retired from party politics now, thank the Lord, but my job really as a populist, if you will, is to get people to consider buying in the shop our kind of administration, our kind of libertarianism, our kind of government, if you will, if you could associate that word with libertarianism. So at the moment, what have we got in the shop window? Let's have a little bit of a look at what we got in the shop window. And Frank touched on it a little bit. We've got socialism. Now, what socialism is, and we have to be simplistic if we're going to get this argument out of the laboratory. We can have fantastic intellectual conversations at the Mises Institute or Cambridge University, but if we want to get this rolling, we've got to be able to speak to that wonderful man on the Clapham omnibus, who I don't believe is nearly as stupid as the media think he is. Generally speaking, I think he's quite a dry, intelligent sort of guy. And I've had more intelligence when I've been in party politics, when I've been campaigning, from the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, than I ever had from an academic at the university. The guy that gets up in the morning and cleans windows for a living has got a damn sight more common sense in him than they have down at the local university, is my experience. So what we've got to do is got to make it a little bit easier for them to comprehend it. So socialism, I would argue, socialism is where they say, the socialists will say, look, we'll look after you from cradle to grave. We'll look after your health system. If you fall on the hard times, we'll pay you. We'll pay your pension. We will do absolutely everything for you from cradle to grave. You don't have to worry about anything. The state will do it. And of course, that's morphed, as we saw earlier. And Frank was saying, basically, the idea was that we looked after people if they fell on hard times. We now have a system of welfarism that they're looked after if they wake up one morning and they just don't fancy going to work. So we've got this sort of welfarism from head to toe, from cradle to grave. And these exchanges with socialism, yes, but you won't need any money. In exchange for all that service, we'll take all your money. And that's basically socialism. And I would argue that conservatism is basically the same. Modern conservatism is the same. They say, we will look after you from cradle to grave. You don't have to worry about anything. We'll run the health system, we'll run the education system, we'll run the unemployment policies. We will do absolutely everything for you. But because we're much cleverer than socialists, we'll only take half your money. And that's really what they've got to sell. We're just better at running your lives than the socialists. And of course, nobody is asking the questions, but we don't want anybody to run our lives. Now, when was the last time you heard Andrew Neil, and I use Andrew Neil specifically because I've done the politics show on a number of occasions, and I think, for better or worse, he's still probably the toughest game in town. Everybody else is patsy, as far as I can see. Andrew Neil does occasionally answer some relevant questions. But I've never even heard Andrew Neil say, is this the role of government? More sugar in your drinks, or are we too fat? Should we have chips? What should school dinners consist of? I've never heard anybody say, is this the role of government? And in order to get away from this terrible system we have of chronic statism, centralised statism, welfarism, we have to reduce the remit of government. And of course, I don't know how many of you read in any detail the Davos speech of Theresa May. I wish I had been. I was invited to go to Davos. I didn't go this year because of this back injury, but I wish I had been out the side there with the cameras, being able to say, so Theresa May is anti-individualism. This is what she said if you read the speech. She's anti-individualism. She actually said that in her speech. And we're going to do business, we have to do business the right way. Now, what does that mean? So what was that speech all about? And the government isn't going to get out of the way was another phrase that she used. So modern conservatism is, in point of fact, fascism. Now, the trouble is with the term fascism, it's always been used as a pejorative term. It's the sort of you get from the National Union of Students. They shout fascist, bigot, racist, misogynist. I'm the lot, actually. They just shouted all of them. But of course, it's adolescence one stage up, isn't it? Because a few years ago, they were saying, hey, four-eyed, fatso, balding. That's what they were saying. And it just moves up. So it stops them having to think. And it stops them having to think. But what you're actually dealing with fascism is a system where the state controls everything for the benefit of the state. And if you look at the concept of fascism, you look at Mussolini's speeches in the 20s, you will see that's right up front, that's in the shop window. The individual doesn't matter, but the state matters. So everybody is subservient to the state. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing, if that's your bag. If that is your political view, well, fair enough. But let's all be honest about it. Let's be honest about it. Why doesn't Doris, I call her Doris, I mean Theresa May, she just looks like a bloody Doris, doesn't she? Why doesn't she just come on to the stage at Davos and speak to the terrorist camp and say, look, fascism isn't all bad. Fascism can be great, because that's what I've just been talking about. Pure fascism. But to say, not as a pejorative term, that is what she wants as a political system. And I think what we actually need is when she comes back, and she's on Andrew Marr, I think tomorrow, but I could be wrong, but I think she's on Andrew Marr's got to say, we're absolutely stunned that you don't like, what's this cult of the individual? What are you actually trying to say? These questions have got to be answered. I'm not hearing these questions. I'm not hearing these questions. So I think what the mainstream media, the sofa bimbos that read the teleprompter things that interview people who are worse and useless, have got to actually say, is this the role of government? Should this be something that government is pursuing? Because we can't cure things We cannot cure the system until we roll back the remit of government. And that's where I think that's where we need to start. And that's something we can all do. When we're talking to people, we're canvassing, we're trying to sell the idea of libertarianism to people, in the pub or over dinner. We can actually probe a little bit questions. Because I think if they go straight to Frank's solutions, good though they are, I think they'll all die of fright. Because we now have the third generation who've had their bodies wiped by the state. And so that's something we've got to people. And we're pushing at an open door. Believe me, we're pushing at an open door. When I was canvassing in 2013, I think it was, for UKIP, and I was in the car park at Leeds Airport, and the guy recognised me. He said, hello, Mr. Bloom, how are we going? So we got chatting a little bit. There was some sort of election going on. I can't remember which one it was, but it was an election. And he said it was just an ordinary working guy in the car park attendant. And Yorkshire, I love it up there because it dries you like up there. You can't get your head up your own arse in Yorkshire, believe me. You can't get out. You walk into the rugby club and you play a bugger of politics, so they'll soon tell you. Anyway, he said to me, this guy, he said, why can't they leave us alone? Why can't they leave us alone? And I thought, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? If you want to eat chips or be fat or smoke in your pub, well, that's what the hell's it got to do with a bloody politician? But nothing to do with them at all, has it? So that's where we need to start pushing at that very open door. Now, one of the great things we get robbed by the state is, of course, inflation and money and central banks. And again, Frank touched on that. Now, I made a speech in 2013, you may have seen it, about central banking. I made lots of speeches in the Parliament about central banking, and they've gone viral, I think is the expression. And one of my speeches on central banking has now gone over 35 million hits. It's only 2 minutes, no preparation at all. I went in there a bit hungover, I seem to remember, and suddenly, and I looked around at all these people. I thought, you really are a bunch of complete wankers. And so this speech, just off the cuff, straight from the shoulder, I've made a number like it. And if you top them all up, they're now over 45 million, and they're growing all the time. They're growing all the time. And it's not because they're brilliant. I'm not pretending it's because they're brilliant speeches. They're not. It's because I'm saying things that the ordinary Joe knows to be true. But your ordinary Joe, your man on the Clapham omnibus, doesn't know how they're doing it. He knows that the banks are cheating him. He knows the state's robbing him, but he doesn't quite understand how he's doing it. You're not talking about money at school. You're not talking about banking at school, are you? You don't get any of this. Nobody trained you on any of this. So I brought up a little book. I put a book together called The Magic of Banking, and of course Mises Institute members will know I've slightly nicked the title. It's I've said The Magic of Banking, and of course Rothbard's book is The Mystery of Banking, and it's not pretending to be anything like Harry Rothbard's book, but it's a primer, if you will. It's an aid memoir, and it's been designed specifically for the man on the Clapham omnibus who doesn't understand banking, but wants to get a bit of a handle on it. And of course for the Chancellor, who also doesn't understand banking, or his predecessor. I mean, how can you double the national debt and get offered a job by Blackstone Investments? I mean, what are they going to do? Clean the cars, is he, or something like that? I hope they don't put him in charge of money. So this is what we need to do. We need to get this libertarian message across. So it needs to be simplistic, relatively simplistic. As I say, it's not because the ordinary man on the Clapham omnibus is anyway so stupid. He's not. He's very sharp. He's very dry. But he does things that we don't do, or some of us don't do. I mean, he knows how to fix my fridge, he knows how to fix the oven, or he knows how to fix my car. That's where his expertise is, and I don't know how to do that, which is why I get him in division of labour again. So my job is for him is to maybe bring something to him that he can say, actually, I read that book, doesn't take that long. I'm beginning to get a little bit of a handle on how the state is stealing my money via the central banks. And I think then they'll be very receptive to some of the ideas that Frank's got, as we all are here, but we've got to pass it on a little bit further. I wanted to talk also just very briefly about the law, about the concept of law. Earlier on we were talking about common law, we were talking about the principles of law, but I do believe it's important to understand, if we go back in English common law, go back to King Alfred, what is the point of law? What is law for? Now, the concept of law is it's the shield for the working man. It's the shield for the ordinary citizen. That's what law is supposed to be. Nobody is above the law, and the law is there to protect us. Now that's changed in the last 50-odd years. The law has become a stick with which to beat the citizen, and that's where it's going wrong. And one of the major problems that we have is when they invented the most hostile thing to the concept of law as protection to the citizen is the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act. And this comes back to the concept of fascism again. It's how do they control, because fascism controls industry. And communism owns the system of production. Fascism doesn't. Fascism controls it. So what they do, and we saw the excellent side of Frank's on the regulation, which has gone completely out of control. Regulate, regulate, regulate. And of course, everyone has an enforcement agency, whether it's a financial service authority, whether it's DEFRA, or whomsoever it may be. We have these enforcement agencies. And it circumnavigates completely the concept and the principles of English law. So when you have that kind of law, when you have an Enabling Act, what you've actually given to DEFRA, or the financial services, or whoever it is, the ability to close a man's business, to stop a man's livelihood, with no recourse in law, no recourse to a jury, 12 good men and true, no judicial precedent, just a regulatory system which is arbitrarily instigated by the enforcement agency. And in terms of the old Financial Service Authority, and it's not changed, the names have changed, but the principles haven't changed, that it's in camera. It isn't open. The Financial Service Authority could close down your organisation. You're not allowed, it doesn't come out in the open. There's no court of appeal. There's no appeals procedure here. There's judicial review. I know lawyers who don't know the difference between appeals and judicial review, would you believe? They think it's broadly speaking the same thing. The degree of ignorance in the modern lawyer is quite astonishing. So we are written out of the law. So we've got to look back, if I may suggest, if we could look back a little bit and say, well, has democracy failed? Has the law failed? So on and so forth. Well, I think what has failed is our ability to hold on to what we had. Now, the system of English law is a very good system. It's over 1,000 years old, the concept of common law. There's nothing wrong with the legal system. There's nothing much wrong, as I can see, with the American Constitution. I think it's a very good document. It's just been abandoned. We've abandoned our system, or the Americans abandoned their Constitution. And it was rather fun, wasn't it, watching the inauguration ceremony yet again, yet another president, and the presidents before them, promising to uphold the Constitution. And without even smiling, without even giggling, no more intention of upholding the Constitution than fly to the moon, these presidents, have they? They drive a coach and horses through it every day. And that's where you end up with, of course, all these rules and regulations. So, again, I got myself into terrible hot water where we were looking at the modern concept of democracy, which, of course, Oliver Cromwell suggested, well, does a man get a vote because he breathes the air? Now, we've got a system at the moment where we have if you get to be 18 years old, you get a vote. Well, it's a bit strong criticising democracy when you've bastardised it with democracy to that extent. That was never the original concept of democracy at all. It was that if you had some, as the Americans would say, excuse me, using some Americans before, and that is skin in the game. You've got to vote if you had some skin in the game. So you contributed something and you've got to say. So the concept of democracy, I think, has been wrecked. But I think we might just consider a little bit whether it's the concept of democracy which is wrong, or the way that we've misused it. And Hans Hoppe right now would argue, and I think Frank would argue too, that that is the nature of human nature. There's nothing you can do with that, because as soon as you've got a system of that sort, it will, it will be crucified. So, and you might argue that's right. You can't run a system take into consideration human nature and the frailty of human nature. But I did suggest, as some might want to contemplate, that if you look at the 1830s reform bills, which was quite a good thing, talking about skin in the game, that was giving the middle classes, the wealth-creating classes, the manufacturing classes, the tradespeople, which we considered to be a bit vulgar at the time, but those people were actually creating the wealth. And it was quite right that political reform came and gave them the vote. And there are those, yes, there are those who think that women should get the vote. Well, yes, women should have the vote. But of course, as we all know, you couldn't not give women the vote because of the work they did in the 1914-18 war. The women proved that they must have the vote by the very work that they did. So back to the ability, skin in the game. But then I would suggest we went far too far. If you have a welfare system, if you have welfareism, and you have a voting system where everybody over the age of 18 gets to vote, you're going to end up with the sort of problems that Frank was outlining in his presentation. But if we went to the original concept of democracy, that the Greeks, you had people who were voting, who were actually running the system, who had a feeling for it, some skin in the game, and in order to do that, you've got to reduce the remit. The remit of government is too big. That you can't move forward with any form of democratic system when you have the remit of government who believe that they should be looking after you from cradle to grave, from morning till night, supervising what you eat and supervising what you drink. That's where the failure is. Very small government, very limited government, very low taxation. And going back to a traditional system of English law, and you solved an awful lot of these sort of problems. I can only speak for this country because in the main, apart from Hong Kong, where I've worked, which of course is actually darkness, no democracy at all, the fate there was just earn money, and everybody got on perfectly well. Working in Hong Kong under the old British flag was jolly good stuff, let me tell you. But I'm a big supporter in that kind of system, a very laissez-faire capitalism. But until we reduce the remit of government, until we reduce taxation, until we actually explain, for example, what capitalism is, there are people walking around who think that capitalism is failing, who believe that they have experienced capitalism. They believe they've lived in a capitalist society. They really do. And if they weren't brought up post-war in Hong Kong, they simply haven't experienced capitalism. They've experienced what the older members of this audience would consider to be mercantilism. Mercantilism. It isn't capitalism at all. We now call it crony capitalism. It's been around for a long time. So there's a lot of things that we need to address. And I think these things have really gone wrong, I think, into perhaps the turn of the last century. I think up until 1900, I think the system principles of English law and relatively laissez-faire capitalism, not in total, though I wouldn't suggest it was actually putting us on the right thing. And if you saw those graphics, you saw just what a small percentage of GDP was actually spent by government. So it isn't a completely lost cause. I thought I always put this in my pocket just to show, getting back to money, because it's all about money and the state cheating it. And this is a sovereign. This is a sovereign, and the date on it is 1908. This gold sovereign, which of course was a pound in 1908. I think it's interesting just to finish off. This today will buy you what it bought you in 1908. Because this is worth 230 quid, and that's about what you can buy. 230 quid worth of booze, or hookers, or whatever you want. An old one, there's one like it. But yeah, this will still buy you exactly what it should buy you, or would have bought you. And that's the degradation of money. And that's why we haven't prospered in the last 50 years in democracy. The standard of living has stagnated, and the system has gained for not for those people who get up and want to go to work and work hard and look after their families and obey the law. It's for scrimshankers and shirkers who don't want to do that, and that's got to stop. And it'll have to stop. It'll have to stop. We're up to 3 or 4 trillion pounds worth of debt. The national debt's doubled in the last 5 or 6 years. So it can't go on, and of course we all know the saying that if it can't go on, it won't go on. So, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen,
we will make America great again.